So hello, good morning or good afternoon or good evening for those of us in this area of the world. And welcome to the online lecture, British-Turkish Relations After Brexit. Before I'm introducing the speaker, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the lecture is being recorded and is also streamed live on YouTube. As always, we invite everybody to say hello via the chat, whether to Dominic or to all of us. And after the lecture, the ambassador has agreed to take questions. So during the lecture, please type your questions in the Q&A. And after the lecture, I'll read the questions out and Dominic has agreed to answer. Now, when introducing the speaker, we announced the lecture by Dominick Chilcott, but it's actually Sir Dominick Chilcott, KCMG, which stands for Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. Normally we have doctor or professor, today it's something else. Dominic read philosophy and theology at the University of Oxford, and afterwards he has been a career diplomat who joined the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in 1982. He has served in Ankara as a junior diplomat, but also in Lisbon, and was at the UK's mission to the European Union in Brussels. Then still part of the EU, so I'm sure that the role now is different from the way it was in years before this, before Brexit. He also had some pretty exciting overseas postings: High Commissioner to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, Deputy Ambassador to the United States, Ambassador to Iran, but unfortunately of only 6 weeks because the posting was ended by the attack on the embassy in 2011, and then Ambassador to Ireland. That was the last posting before Dominic came to Turkey, where he is now Ambassador to Turkey. He also worked in London and in the UK in between postings overseas on the European, African and Middle Eastern affairs. He was director of the Iraq Policy Unit in 2003 and director for bilateral relations with European countries from 2003 to 2006. Today, Dominic is going to talk about the changing strategic context of the UK's relation with Turkey, especially after Brexit. He will focus on what Britain's foreign policy priorities are likely to be, how Turkey fits into this changed picture, and whether there is common ground on which to build for closer relations. Without further ado, I would like to pass the word to Dominic.
Thank you, Lut. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, a big thank you to the director of the British Institute, Dr. Lutgaard van der Put, for inviting me to give this lecture. Many notable academics and experts have spoken at the British Institute over the years, and it's an honor and a privilege to join their ranks. So thank you. My subject this evening, as Dr. van der Put said, is British-Turkish relations after Brexit, and I will indeed be very happy to take questions afterwards. Now, it may seem a routine matter for a British ambassador to Turkey to talk about our bilateral relations. For heaven's sake, if I can't do that standing on my head, the British taxpayer paying for me and my wife to live in that palatial residence in Gazi Osman Pasha, about which more later, is being pretty short-changed. But actually, talking about Turco-British bilateral relations now, at the beginning of a new era for the UK's international diplomacy, when the UK is no longer a member state of the European Union, but an independent actor, does present a challenge. Brexit has dramatically changed the rules of the international game for the UK. We've been here before in the UK, of course, trying to figure out Britain's role in the world after a major alteration in the political landscape. Nearly 60 years ago, in 1962, Dean Acheson, who had been US Secretary of State under President Truman, created a storm of huge proportions in the UK by claiming that Great Britain had lost an empire, but has not yet found a role. It was a neat turn of phrase containing a lot of truth. Tony Blair, when Prime Minister between 1997 and 2007, developed the idea of the UK's place in the world as a transatlantic bridge, arguing, strong in Europe and strong with the United States. There is no choice between the two. Stronger with one means stronger with the other. The UK is the bridge between the US and Europe. Now, as it happens, I'm not a big fan of these bridge metaphors, whether it's the UK as a bridge between the US and Europe, or even Turkey as a bridge between Europe and the Middle East. These bridge metaphors underestimate the direct contacts between countries at opposite ends of the bridge, who may feel no need to drive over it to enjoy productive relations with the other side. Berlin never required London to hold its hand in Washington. But to be fair to Mr. Blair, it certainly was an article of faith inside the Foreign Office for many years that the UK brought greater value to relations with the United States and was more appreciated in Washington when we exercised strong influence inside the European Union. Whatever London may think should be the UK's role in the world, however, other countries may, of course, beg to differ. For example, at the same time that Mr. Blair was developing his Atlantic Bridge concept for the UK, the then Indian Prime Minister, Indira Gujral, whom we had upset by offering to mediate between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, alleged that Britain was a third-rate power nursing illusions of grandeur from its colonial past. Now, you might have heard similar accusations made by the Remain camp, or the anti-Brexit camp, in the 2016 referendum campaign about our EU membership in the UK. And whether or not you think there's an element of imperial nostalgia in the Brexit vote, it's certainly an important diplomatic skill to be aware of the very different ways other countries interpret one's actions and ideas. Perceptions really matter for our relations with Turkey as well, and I'm going to return to this later. As the Scottish poet Robbie Burns said, "Oh, would some power the giftie gie us, to see ourselves as others see us, it would frae many a blunder free us, and foolish notion." Brexit has profoundly affected the UK's bilateral relations with Turkey as well. When the UK was an EU member state, so much of the content of our bilateral relations was perforce conducted through the European Union and its institutions. EU membership increasingly shaped our worldview and our international relations globally. The EU fixed the arrangements for our trade with Turkey, and we ploughed money into Turkey through the EU's programs that supported its accession process and the FRIT program for Syrian refugees. But it's not just individual items like trade, technical assistance, humanitarian aid that Brexit has upended. By removing the UK's seat from the EU table, Brexit disrupted the old grand bargain between the UK and Turkey. And what was that grand bargain? For most of the 20 years before Brexit, the UK was Turkey's strongest and most sympathetic supporter within the European Union. We encouraged Turkey's integration into the EU's structures and programs, and indeed welcomed the opening of accession negotiations for Turkey. We saw this process as facilitating Turkey's own efforts to promote reform inside the country, to align itself to European economic, legal, and political standards. We reckoned we all gained from the Turkish government's reforms. We believed those reforms generated greater freedom and prosperity for Turkish citizens and made Turkey a more predictable, like-minded, and self-confident partner for the UK the European Union, and indeed the wider West. It's no coincidence that the years of greatest economic growth and development in Turkey, the first decade of this millennium, were also when the country was undergoing the most ambitious reforms. Admittedly, at the time negotiations started, we didn't know whether Turkey's accession process would ultimately succeed, though we hoped it would. But we sincerely believed the journey was worth undertaking in and of itself. The act of traveling was almost as valuable as arriving at the destination. Furthermore, we hoped that once Turkey had aligned itself to the EU's political, judicial, and commercial standards, those member states who were nervous or wary about Turkey's accession would look at the prospect of Turkey joining the bloc in a much more favorable light. Our recognition of Turkey's importance to European security underpinned our championing of Turkey within the EU. During the Cold War, Turkey had been NATO's guardian of the alliance's southeastern flank, with a land border shared with the Soviet Union. Nowadays, as the NATO ally with the second largest land forces in the alliance, Turkey continues to contribute a huge amount to our collective security. The Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union may have disappeared, but Russian actions against Ukraine, Georgia, and the Baltic states remind us that Moscow continues to pose a threat to the peace and security of Europe. And apart from its NATO role, Turkey also now serves as a breakwater for Europe against the waves of instability that threaten Europe from the south and east, by containing irregular flows of refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other countries, in fighting Daesh and other extremists, and in disrupting organized criminal gangs smuggling people or drugs. In return for our support in the EU for Turkey, the UK benefited both from the security Turkey was giving to Europe as a whole, but also from closer, more focused bilateral cooperation on combating terrorism, tackling serious criminal organizations, and preventing irregular migration. But as I say, the grand bargain no longer holds, as the UK outside the European Union self-evidently does not have the influence we once had on the direction of European Union policy towards Turkey. Now, the UK still wants broadly the same things from relations with Turkey as we did before Brexit. Although we cannot promise influence within the European Union, we can still build a strong cooperative bilateral relationship outside the European Union that serves both our countries' interests. Indeed, many people in Turkey see Brexit as an opportunity to take our relations up to the next level. Unconstrained by the European Union's wary political center of gravity towards Turkey, no longer inhibited by the views of certain member states that act as a sea anchor, dragging back the development of relations with Turkey, some argue, isn't the way now clear for Britain and Turkey to do more together? Some also ask whether the UK's new relationship with the European Union might provide a model for Turkey's relations in the absence of progress in the accession talks. The fact that the United Kingdom and Turkey are now, geographically speaking, like the two China dogs at opposite ends of the European Union mantelpiece, constitutes surely some kind of common geostrategic ground that ought to generate a certain rapport and bring us closer together. After all, we both have great imperial pasts, with the confidence and instinctive internationalism that empire develops. As neighbors of the European Union, we both face the daily challenge of deciding when to align ourselves with EU standards and policies, and when to exercise our sovereignty to pursue an independent course, albeit that independent course may come at the cost of losing some access to the EU single market. And to be honest, while Turkey remains a candidate country for EU membership, seeking the modernization of its customs union with the EU, I'm not sure that the UK does provide a model for Turkey's relations with the European Union. Turkey is trying to step into the revolving door of the Justus Lipsius building in Brussels, just after the UK has used it to exit. So our perspectives are quite different, even if at the moment we're both standing on the pavement outside. However, before going further into contemporary bilateral relations, I'd like to take a detour into our past, in the hopes of finding a richly textured political and economic landscape and interesting and not completely irrelevant context. For those with a selective historical bent, there are a couple of parallels, well, three actually come to mind, about what happens when Britain and Turkey find themselves in competition with or opposed to the major power on the European continent of the day. The English first, and then after the Union of Scotland and England in 1707, the British have rarely felt comfortable when one major power has dominated Europe. Trying to secure the balance of power between the biggest European countries was a cornerstone of British foreign policy from the 16th to the early 20th century. Catholic Spain threatened us in the 16th century, and revolutionary France in the 18th and early 19th centuries. And in the 19th century also, Russia threatened the interests of the British Empire too. I imagine the Ottoman Empire, at the other end of the continent from Britain, similarly may have been happier when rivalry between European countries maintained the balance of power to Turkey's west, keeping them preoccupied with one another and not focused on trying to push back the frontiers of Ottoman rule. On the positive side, for most of the 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, geography kept the British and the Turks far enough apart not to threaten each other directly, while our separate connections in Europe gave us a common interest in defending ourselves against powerful rivals in Europe's heartland. Let me illustrate this more precisely. Episode 1 of a history series called This Orient Isle, which is currently available on BBC Sounds, begins with the following words. It is often forgotten that during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, England's relations with the Muslim world were more extensive and amicable than at any other time in history other than today. After Elizabeth was excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church by the Pope in 1570, the Queen and her advisors were determined to reach out beyond Europe to the Islamic powers of Turkey, Persia, and Morocco to forge a new alliance against their common enemy, Catholic Spain. One of the grander bedrooms in my aforementioned Ghazi Osman Pasha residence, courtesy of the British taxpayer, is named after Sir William Harburn, the first English ambassador to the Sublime Porte, who was sent to Istanbul by Queen Elizabeth in 1583. Harburn apparently persuaded the Sultan Murad III that the Ottoman Empire should not support Catholic Spain in the latter's war with Protestant England. And building on that diplomatic success, he then obtained tariff reductions for English exports, especially in textiles and timber. His success as ambassador, building up our bilateral relations from scratch, encouraging the Turks and Brits to make common cause in international relations and develop bilateral commerce, has set the bar very high for all his successors. Similarly, 228 years later, in 1798, when Napoleon's territorial ambitions, which had threatened Britain from the outset, extended to the conquest of Egypt, it was an alliance of Britain's fleet and Ottoman troops, notably at the Battle of the Nile and the later siege of Acre, that eventually defeated the French and forced them to withdraw. As a gesture of thanks to the admiral in charge of the fleet, the Sultan of the time, Selim III, made Nelson, for it was he, the first knight commander of the newly created Order of the Crescent, and presented him with a chelenk, the first time such an honor was conferred on a non-Ottoman. Nelson was a famously vain man, as well as being a great admiral, and he loved wearing the chelenk. A portrait by Lemuel Francis Abbott shows the chelenk resplendent in Nelson's hat. Sadly, thieves stole the chelenk from the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich in 1951, and it has never been recovered. But the Goldsmiths Company of the City of London has made a reproduction, which is much admired today. And incidentally, Goldsmiths' chief executive happens to be Sir David Reddaway, a former ambassador to Turkey. But I digress. The biggest threat to the Ottoman Empire for the last 250 years of its existence came from an expansionist Russia. Between 1676 and 1918, Russia and the Ottoman Empire fought at least 11 wars. In the 19th century, Britain was drawn into what became known as the Great Game, defending its interests in India against Russian expansionism to the south. The ultimate recognition of the British and Ottoman Empire's common interests in containing Russia was, of course, our alliance with France in the Crimean War from 1853 to 56. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, I wouldn't want to put a lot of weight on the parallels of yesteryear to today's circumstances. But it's true that the way we understand our history can easily shape our view about other countries. And I will argue shortly that these significant episodes of our history that I've just talked about, where the UK and Turkey supported one another, are not always given the weight they deserve. It may be a bit of a flight of fancy, but Brexit means that Britain and Turkey once again find ourselves, to a degree, in friendly competition with the dominant power in Europe, namely the European Union. Both of us are, of course, determined to pursue cooperative and mutually beneficial relations with the European Union, but we are nonetheless outsiders. And I'm not implying for a moment that the European Union is anything other than a force for peace, stability, human rights, prosperity, and democracy. It's clearly not a destabilizing expansionist or militaristic power. So although I can't quite put my finger on its significance yet, there's no hiding from the fact that there is a club of European countries whose leading members are perhaps Turkey, Norway, and Switzerland, which have in common the experience of dealing with the European Union from the outside. The UK is now the newest member of this club. How and whether that club membership, that commonality, brings us closer together, I guess time will tell. But let's now turn to the issue of the UK's reputation in Turkey and the shaping of that reputation by history. Kadir Has University carries out a regular survey of public impressions of Turkey's foreign policy. It's called the Perception of Foreign Policy Survey, and many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with it, as when it gets published, it proves a very good copy for journalists, and plenty of newspaper headlines are provided by it. I have to say it seems a very sound and honest piece of research, which is why, as Britain's ambassador to Turkey, I find its results so disturbing. The data I'm going to cite is from the 2019 report. One of the questions the Kadir Has researchers put to the Turkish public is whether a number of individually named countries are friends of Turkey. 20% of Turks apparently see Russia as a friendly country, and 67% see it as unfriendly. Given all those wars before 1918 and the subsequent tensions in the region, perhaps that's not a big surprise, if a bit disappointing for my Russian colleague. However, when it comes to the UK, 81% of Turks regard the UK as an unfriendly country, and only 6%, I'll repeat that figure, 6% see the UK as a friend. As if that wasn't bad enough, another question asks whether Turks see certain countries as posing a threat to Turkey. Apparently, 63% of Turks believe the UK poses a threat to Turkey today. Meanwhile, for comparison's sake, only 44% of Turks see Russia as a threat. Now, I don't have time now to examine the reasons for this perception of the UK in Turkey. Is it a reaction to the two Gulf Wars of modern times? Or does suspicion of Britain have deeper roots? Can the never to have been implemented Treaty of Sèvres still hold such thrall over the collective imagination of the Turkish nation? As I say, I won't try to answer those questions now. However, as Britain's ambassador, I have to say that these views are profoundly wrong. We've been NATO allies for 59 years, since Turkey joined the alliance in 1952. The thrust of everything the UK is doing here, and I guess I should know, in building our bilateral cooperation with Turkey is well-intentioned. The risk is that widely held, if utterly mistaken, beliefs, such as the ones I've referred to in the Kadir Has survey, probably could hold back the development of our bilateral relations. And we, as professional diplomats, need to be aware of them. The problem of perceptions is not limited to Turkey, of course. As we saw during the Brexit referendum campaign in the UK, there were some unpleasant things said about the likelihood and impact of Turkish migration to the UK had we stayed in the EU. Those sort of claims represented the worst kind of scaremongering. As it happens, now that the UK is out of the EU and no longer subject to the rules of free movement, we have established our own global immigration system. Under this new British scheme, permission to come and work in the UK will be determined not by nationality, but by the skills and experience of applicants. So the UK visa people will now assess a Turk seeking to work in the UK on exactly the same basis as they would a German or an Italian or indeed an American or an Australian. Let's return to Dean Acheson's challenge and consider post-Brexit what Britain's role in international affairs should now be, and depending on the answer, work out how relations with Turkey fit into this new post-Brexit scheme of things. There seems to be a certain logic in putting the bilateral Turco-British cart behind the UK's post-Brexit international objectives horse, rather than the other way round. Now, the timing of this lecture is exquisitely juxtaposed close to the publication of the official British response to the Acheson challenge. Sometime later this month, the British government is due to publish the results of its integrated review into Britain's foreign, development, trade and defence policies, with the aim of fine-tuning and coordinating those different strands of our international activities better to fit our post-Brexit status and the changing and more uncertain world we face. I haven't seen the findings of the integrated review, it's not been published yet, but like a number of my colleagues in our diplomatic service, I have some idea of what the review is likely to say. For example, the UK seeks a world where international cooperation enables us to tackle the problems we face, where free and fair trade flourishes, and where the exchange of knowledge generates benefits for all people. We strongly believe in the international rules-based system because that best provides for the peaceful resolution of disputes, maintains the openness necessary for the flow of trade and ideas, which is crucial to our prosperity, and facilitates international cooperation required to solve major issues like climate change, where states acting alone will achieve much less. At the same time, we realize we have to continue to make the case for the international rules-based system because the norms of the international system are more contested than ever since the creation of the United Nations in 1945. Moreover, the view of world history that stated that countries that had achieved democracy, freedom, and the rule of law would never regress to less liberal forms of government, and that the arc of history would always eventually bend towards freer societies, is not being borne out by current experience. The Arab Spring did not usher in a paradigm shift from autocracy to democracy. Indeed, the last few years have seen something of a democratic recession in many countries around the world. And the world in which we all operate is not getting less complex in other ways too. China's emergence as a superpower and the way the United States responds to it is perhaps the defining geostrategic challenge of the next several decades. In a major speech on US foreign policy last week, the new US Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, described relations with China as the, quote, biggest geopolitical test of the 21st century, unquote. While several other countries, Russia, Iran, North Korea, posed serious challenges to the United States, he said, China was different. It was the only country with the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power seriously to challenge the open international system. The US's relationship with China, Blinken said, would be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it could be, and adversarial when it had to be. China must be approached from a position of strength, which required working with partners and allies. The rise of China is part of a wider phenomenon where we observe economic power and dynamism shifting from Europe to Asia. All European countries, including the UK, have to adjust to this new reality, which is linked to the high speed of change in science, technology, the management of big data, which some Asian economies seem to embrace with greater enthusiasm than others in the West. And then there is the massive challenge to humanity's future from climate change, from the loss of biodiversity, and, as we know only too well, from lethal pandemics. At home, we want the UK to be secure and resilient, successfully tackling the threats to ourselves that arise from terrorism, serious organized crime, hostile actions by states, climate change, or public health emergencies like the COVID pandemic. We will continue to see the United States as our most important bilateral partner in tackling these challenges. We'll want to strengthen the stability and prosperity of our Euro-Atlantic neighborhood. And at the same time, we'll wish to give priority to investing in strong relations with Indo-Pacific countries, especially those that are open societies and are keen to encourage greater trade. NATO will continue to be the bedrock of our collective security, and our commitment to spending more than 2% of GDP on defense each year is testament to the seriousness with which we believe NATO's mission. We will try to deepen ties with dynamic democracies and key regional actors. Our permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, our instinctive international outlook, and our wish to play a constructive role in working with others to solve international problems will mean the UK will remain internationally engaged and active. We will put science, technology, and data at the center of relations with other countries, and we will seek to advance our collective prosperity by investing in science, technology, and data management. And science will also be central to our responses to climate change, to biodiversity loss, to antimicrobial resistance, and to COVID-19 and future pandemics. And meanwhile, we will also put forward a generous and more coherent offer to the developing world, following the merger of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Department for International Development. Before the pandemic, the UK allocated 0.7% of its GNI to development spending each year. With the shock to our economy caused by COVID and the contraction, We are temporarily reducing that to 0.5%, still a very significant figure, but we will return to 0.7% as soon as economic conditions permit. Now, where do relations between the UK and Turkey fit into that roughly sketched out picture? Finally, you may say, he's getting to the nub of the matter. Well, frankly, on most of the points mentioned above, Turkey is already an important actor. We will want to work closely with the Turkish government on pretty much all aspects of that agenda. We're both NATO allies, and that'll be a critical area where we'll want to work with Turkey to reinforce the alliance as part of our efforts to strengthen our Euro-Atlantic neighbourhood and deter threats to our collective security. We'll want to do more joint training to improve the interoperability of our armed forces and to encourage our defence industries to collaborate together, as we're doing on the TFX 5th generation fighter aircraft project. Our cooperation with Turkey to safeguard our people against other national security threats such as terrorism, organised crime, irregular migration will remain important to both of us for the foreseeable future. Turkey's geography puts it on the front line of many of these threats, and the UK will wish to continue to recognise the special pressures Turkey faces and to provide moral and material support. On a more positive note, Turkey's geography, climate, attractive beaches, historical heritage, cuisine, friendly hospitality, and excellent value for money also make it a popular destination for British tourists. Before the coronavirus pandemic hit, we had expected 3 million Brits to come on holiday to Turkey last year. That represents a lot of people who, with luck, would have really enjoyed visiting Turkey and will return to the UK as ambassadors for this country, doing something about those reputational issues I mentioned earlier. But it's also a lot of people for the Turkish authorities to protect from those who would seek to do them harm. And we maintain very close links with the Turkish governors, with the gendarmes, with the chiefs of police in the tourist areas of this country to ensure that they remain safe for our British visitors. On Turkey's burden of hosting some 4 million irregular migrants and refugees, the UK will continue to do our part by paying into the EU's FRIT programme for Syrian refugees. We fully recognise that Turkey's generosity in providing hospitality to so many refugees requires us and other Western governments to make a significant financial effort to support Turkey in return. Now, I mentioned China. On China, Turkey faces the same conundrum as we all do about when to cooperate with China and when to resist it, with an additional sensitivity felt even more acutely here, I expect, than in many countries, about the wretched state of the poor Uyghur people. Inevitably, given the huge dimensions of the issue of China for all of us, particularly for countries on the course of the Belt and Road, we'll want to strengthen our dialogue with Turkey on China. Turkey is, of course, a major regional power in a part of the world where Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and Europe all meet. It has increasing influence in all these areas, which makes it an even more attractive partner for dialogue, and if possible, for concerted action on a wide variety of foreign policy issues. We'll want to work with Turkey within the international architecture, often led by the UN, that has been established to pursue the peaceful resolution of disputes and conflicts in the region. The resilience of the United Kingdom depends as much on a successful economy as anything else. Having left the European Union, British-Turkish trade faces problems of adjustment and opportunities. Last December, we signed a bilateral free trade agreement with Turkey to safeguard as far as possible our existing trade, worth more than $20 billion a year as it moved outside the customs union, a consequence of Brexit. The majority of that trade is in manufactured goods, steel, and some processed agriculture. Our trade agreement has nothing to say about services, which is 80% of the UK's economy, nor are there any significant concessions in the agreement on trade in fresh agricultural produce and livestock. Our two governments believe that we can and should be more ambitious than the status quo. We've committed ourselves to start negotiations within 2 years for a free trade agreement 2.0 to cover all sectors of our economies with an eye to digital and data, as well as services, fresh agricultural produce, public procurement, and all the rest. This won't be an easy negotiation and may take a good length of time to complete, but the prize will be worth it, as we could be exporting much more to each other. For example, Turkey and Germany have roughly equally big populations, but the UK's trade with Germany is 8 times bigger than with Turkey. Without claiming a close parallel between the German and Turkish economies, an 8-fold difference seems too big and strongly suggests there's a lot of potential for growing our trade further with Turkey. And there are 2 further reasons for optimism in our bilateral trade. First, the experience of the scramble for protective clothing and equipment last year, as COVID threatened our health workers, care homes and hospitals, revealed how overly dependent we had become on supplies from China. The cry now is to diversify and make our supply chains more resilient. Turkey, with its broad-based manufacturing sector, its low overheads and its high standards, is well placed to provide an alternative to China. After all, what is the strapline for Turkish manufacturing if it's not European standards at Chinese prices? And secondly, as European countries make serious efforts to decarbonize their economies, we will need to buy new green, clean equipment to achieve our goal of net zero emissions. Again, Turkey's circumstances mean it should be able to turn itself into a major supplier of these new climate-friendly goods that the UK and Europe will need. To keep selling into the single market, the European Union single market, will require Turkey to align itself more closely to European policies on climate change to avoid the carbon adjustment tariffs the EU will seek to introduce at some point. If Turkey ratifies the Paris Treaty, as we hope it will this year, and takes the other steps needed to avoid carbon adjustment tariffs, it will become an even more attractive foreign direct investment destination. Foreign companies will be looking for a place where consumers will not question the integrity of their green credentials, where they can invest in manufacturing the zero emissions goods of the future. And talking of climate change, the UK will host the COP26 climate meeting this November in Glasgow. Our hosting the COP is evidence of our appetite for leading international action to limit global warming, as well as of our awareness of the threat climate change presents and the urgency of coordinated international action to tackle it. Our principal aim for Glasgow is that countries should make more ambitious national pledges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that the totality of these pledges should lead to global warming not exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius. All countries have a part to play in achieving what already looks like a very stretching target, and we look forward to working with Turkey this year on climate issues in the run-up to the Glasgow meeting and afterwards. Climate brings to mind science. The UK, as I said earlier, will put science and technology at the centre of future bilateral relationships. We have very good science links with Turkey already, nurtured by the Newton-Çelebi programme, which promotes research collaborations between British and Turkish academics and researchers. We'll want to do more of that, and Turkey, with its large young population and over 200 universities, should be able to respond. Achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals continues to be an important aim of the UK's international policies. Despite the temporary reduction in our development spending caused by the economic contraction in the UK's economy because of the pandemic, the UK remains one of the world's largest donor countries. Turkey is a rising power among the donor nations, and we'll wish to work with Turkey within the UN system, coordinating with the international financial institutions as necessary to help the poorest countries of the world in their efforts to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. The lingua franca of international diplomacy in the 19th century was French. Now, largely thanks to US power and the legacy of the British Empire, it is English. Good English language skills are in high demand worldwide, and the UK, as the country where English was first spoken, is clearly well equipped to teach English to the world. The British Council are working with the Ministry of Education in Turkey and the Sabancı Foundation on a project to improve the standards of English teachers in Turkey. The Turkish Parliament last week ratified a bilateral cultural centres agreement that will expand the work of the Yunus Emre Institute in the UK and enable the British Council to teach English in Turkey. The Council are also facilitating contacts between universities in the UK and Turkey. And indeed, in the next few days, I'll be attending a virtual signing ceremony for a memorandum of understanding on cooperation between Ostim Technical University here in Ankara and Coventry University in Britain. And while the UK will no longer participate in the Erasmus Plus student exchange scheme, we have recently announced our own national scheme called the Turing Scheme, which aims to promote student exchanges between the UK and all countries of the world. Another one of the family of British institutions operating in Turkey that I should mention, not least since they are our hosts this evening, is the British Institute here in Ankara. Founded in 1947, the British Institute supports, enables and encourages research in Turkey and the Black Sea region in a wide range of fields, including archaeology, ancient and modern history, heritage management, social sciences, and contemporary issues in public policy and political sciences. Many of the Brits that have best understood Turkey, people like David Barchard, Cyril Mango, and David French, to name just three, have had an association with the British Institute, which, in its own understated way, if Luke doesn't mind my saying so, has nurtured lasting, constructive, people-to-people links between Turkey and the UK for nearly 75 years. Long may it go on doing so. Now, I could go on in this vein for much longer, but we all have homes to go to, and even if we're already at home, there are doubtless other things we need to do today. But there is one more question to address. Does this long list of cooperation and people-to-people links add up to a transactional or a strategic partnership? To be honest, it's still a bit too early to tell. But the foundations for a relationship that go beyond the transactional are there. Turkey and the UK's membership of NATO show we are strategically aligned. Our status as founder members of the Council of Europe mean we aspire to the same democratic values. As two G20 economies, we are among the most important economic powers globally, and we share a responsibility for leading the global recovery, building back better and greener, for keeping the trade routes open, and for combating protectionism. The UK wants Turkey to be prosperous and powerful because that will make our cooperation with Turkey, which promotes the welfare of Turks and Brits, more effective. I've no doubt that Turkey reciprocally wishes the UK to enjoy similar success. The more we can expand and deepen the common ground between us, the more we can build the habit of cooperation between us. The more we can reinforce the trust that such cooperation creates, the more we can overcome out-of-date ideas of one another and improve those figures in the Kadir Has University survey. If we do all that, and I see no inherent reason why we should not do so, the closer we will become to being genuine strategic partners of the kind that Queen Elizabeth I may have envisaged when she dispatched Sir William Harburn to be England's ambassador to the Sublime Porte all those years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a lecture that has given all of us lots to think about, and that is also reflected in the very high number of questions. So I think that the best thing we can do is start and try to answer. I think that the first question, which was related to Erasmus exchange program, was answered already by the ambassador during his talk, where he said that there is a British scheme that is starting. The second one is from Mohammed Ermizan. Very good point so far. I'm interested to ask about how the UK view Turkish foreign policy in the Middle East. Turkey has started several military interventions without NATO support, but independent of it. What is the British position on the recent Turkish military moves in the Middle East and Africa as well?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I mean, basically, you know, Turkey is on the border of some of the countries which are amongst the most unstable and with ungoverned spaces, dangerous countries anywhere in the world. So I think we have to have a lot of sympathy for Turkey's geography, which means it's not an option, for example, just to let the civil war in Syria burn itself through, because Turkey is already living with the consequences of dealing with terrorism that comes out of Syria, and with the 3.6 million Syrian refugees, at least that number, that is hosting in the country. So I think, you know, within the international law rules, it's not surprising that Turkey should be taking action in Syria, and indeed in hot pursuit of the PKK in northern Iraq as well. You know, I think there was a well-known American academic think tank and indeed practitioner of diplomacy called Richard Haas, who talked about wars of necessity and kind of wars that one elected to do. And I have to say, if you look at Turkey's geography, I'm not suggesting it's involved in lots of wars, but you have to have some sympathy, I think, for the measures it takes in its own defense.
All right, thank you. Eltarishan Elchibe asks, Mr. Chilcott, how do you interpret the future of Janzuk project? Could we see Britain as a leader of such an alternative bloc?
I'm sorry, I don't know. What is the Janzuk project? I don't know what it is.
Right. I was hoping that you knew.
Canada, New Zealand, UK, Australia.
Right.
Sorry, could you say it again, Dan?
Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, kind of Commonwealth-ish.
Yeah. So what's our view of it? Well, I mean, our view is that although we're going to go on cooperating and working very closely with our former European Union partners, part of the decisions that we have taken in looking for a foreign policy beyond Brexit is to reach beyond Europe. So we will look to work with dynamic democracies, as I said before. And I think Canada, Australia, New Zealand, was one more, was there? Okay. Whatever that group of countries are, Commonwealth countries, which are democracies, which invest in science, you know, which support the international rules-based system, will become, I think, even more important partners of the UK in our foreign policy in future. Reach beyond Europe.
So I'll take over the Q&A.
So the question was about Cyprus. I've got that. Shall I?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, let's hear your thoughts on that, Dominic. That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, as people will have spotted, the UK in the last few months has been very active in trying to help generate the conditions in which the UN Secretary General will think that there's enough common ground between the two communities on the island to relaunch settlement talks. And I agree, this is something as a guarantor power with Turkey and with Greece, and as a friend to both the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots, this is absolutely an issue that the UK should be involved in and should be working with the other guarantor powers and the parties on the island. So yes, and we have been doing so. Not only should we do it, we have been doing so. We will continue to do so. It's not for us to develop a plan or a blueprint, despite what you may read in the papers. What we're trying to do is talk through ideas with the parties and support them as they prepare for the meeting that the UN Secretary General has called at the end of April. Thank you.
Okay. There's a question from Shule Ajar. She wants to know if there's going to be any kind of bilateral business arrangements or agreements made between Ankara and London to replace the now finished Ankara agreement, given the interest of Turkish business people in doing business in Britain.
Yeah, no, the answer, we're not going to have any, there will be no bilateral migration, immigration, work permit schemes with any country in the world. We're going to have a global system that'll be the same for everybody. So in some ways that's an advantage for Turkey, but it does mean that the old Ankara agreement route to find work in the UK, that obviously no longer applies, and we're not developing a bilateral successor to it. So everything will be done on a global basis, but it will be done without discrimination on the basis of nationality. So a Turkish applicant to work in the UK will have to fulfill the same criteria as an American applicant or a German applicant or a French applicant.
Okay. There's a question from William Park. He wants to know whether Turkey, as a member of the EU Customs Union, whether Turkey's membership of the EU Customs Union will inhibit the development of UK-Turkey trade relations.
I think the answer is not at the moment. So the relationship that Turkey has on trade with the European Union within the customs union concerns manufactured goods, processed agricultural goods, and there are separate agreements on steel as well. All of those are replicated as far as possible in our bilateral free trade agreement. What I think is the opportunity for us is that we can get ahead of the development of Turkey's trade commercial relationship with the European Union, depending, of course, how the process of trying to modernize Turkey's customs union with the EU goes. But assuming that we can work more quickly than that, we can have in place agreements, a wider agreement that covers, as I said earlier, fresh agricultural produce, where we will not be as nervous as the European Union may be about protecting its own market, because we generally don't compete with Turkey for the same agricultural products. And where with the huge accent on services in the UK economy, there would be a kind of, there would be a natural read across for us to do more on services together. And then there are wider issues like so much of the future economy is going to be digital, and working to facilitate digital trade between us would be another important area to look at. So I don't feel that as things stand today that we're going to be held back. And although, of course, if Turkey does have a services agreement or a fresh agricultural produce agreement with the European Union, that then may act as a constraint on us. But I think that's a little way off at the moment.
Okay. Fidevs Robinson, journalist, writes, to quote, "The UK is leading efforts to advocate for media freedom and safety of journalists internationally. Today, its first action plan for protection of journalists from abuse and harassment was launched. Yet when it comes to reacting to increasingly serious violations in Turkey, the UK is conspicuously silent," she writes. Why?
Well, of course, I wouldn't agree with the pretext or the assumptions behind that question. I think we have a very good dialogue with the Turkish authorities on these issues. I think the Turkish government knows where we stand on these issues, and we will continue to be talking about difficult and sensitive questions between us. But it's because we have, as people say these days, a load-bearing relationship, because we don't see it as being in our interests to embarrass Turkey in public or to sound hostile. I think our views get a hearing perhaps that others may not do.
Okay. There's a lot. I'm going through questions, and there are so many on Cyprus, but you've already answered one. I don't know if there's much more to say on that at this moment.
And there are even more, I think, on the chat, because people continue posting questions to the chat. Please, can you post the questions to the Q&A?
I found another topic. Okay. David Tong writes, Ambassador, I wonder if you could comment on how Turkey's purchase of the S-400 affects our two countries' cooperation in NATO and on air fighter development.
Yeah, well, I think it's it's a matter of record that NATO has a kind of doctrine where we are trying to wean ourselves off the procurement of or dependence on defense equipment made in Russia. So it definitely goes against the spirit of what NATO is trying to do, the purchase of the S-400s by Turkey. There are some practical consequences for us all about interoperability. I'm not an expert in the field, but an air defense system is a highly complex arrangement where lots of different parts of the defense system are integrated one into each other. And if you have S-400s as part of that, that affects that interoperability. So there are some consequences, but we are where we are, and we hope very much that the United States and Turkey will be able to resolve their differences over the S-400s.
Okay. Shall I keep going, Lou? So you're back to normal, it seems.
I'm back to normal, but please keep going. It's all going very well. So.
Okay. Amanda Yeşilbursa from Bursa asks, Uludağ University, she asks, how do you envisage cooperation between Turkish and British universities to develop? How could Turkey encourage more British academics to visit?
Well, I imagine you guys in the Institute are better placed than me to answer that question, but I guess it comes down to kind of academic standards and the opportunities that are available. If you want more British academics to come here, they've got to feel that they will be coming to places where the ability to research, to do research, is suited to Turkey's conditions, and where they feel they'll be able to flourish and pursue their careers and progress. So I've always thought that there are lots of very fine universities here in Turkey. I suspect there's a bit of a kind of marketing issue or an image issue for Turkey, that British academics don't think of coming here first. They may think of going to Germany or United States first. But actually, there are some areas here. I think if you were doing research into Middle Eastern politics, if you were doing research into archaeology, history, architecture, the sort of different civilizations, this would be a wonderful place to come. I think it's for the universities themselves really probably have to sell themselves better in the UK, and I think the British Council is up for the challenge of supporting that.
Yeah, and I'm sure we do our best to facilitate academics coming here, of which I'm one. It would be nice to have more colleagues from the UK, certainly. There's a question from Ali Ozenolu. He asks, how can tourism between the two countries be further developed this year and in the next years?
Yeah, I mean, the immediate task this year is to manage and solve the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disrupted travel so much. And I think we see that the solution is going to be through the achievement of herd immunity through vaccination. So that's the first task, is to make our two countries safe for travel. And we've got distance to go in the UK and similarly, I think in Turkey there's a distance to go. Once we've done that, I think there is such pent-up frustration and desire in Britain for British people to go overseas for holidays, particularly from this summer onwards, that I think you can leave this one to the market. I don't think you have to try too hard. I think you'll find lots of people who've had jobs, been lucky enough to stay employed through the COVID pandemic, haven't been able to spend their money because there's nothing to spend it on. So I think we will find the tourism industry bouncing back very strongly as soon as the conditions on the ground allow for safe travel and a safe holiday.
Yeah, let's hope so. I definitely have relatives and friends who would love to come and visit me here. Just waiting for the chance. Umut Parmaksız, who's a fellow of ours, asks, are there any plans for cooperation in the defense industry apart from the TFX project? And what is the situation in the TFX project cooperation?
Well, on TFX, the good news is that TFX is ahead of schedule. So it's in the first phase of the TFX project is the design phase. The second phase is the build a prototype phase. And then the third phase is the kind of industrial production phase. So we're still in the first phase. It's coming to a conclusion at some point, I think, by the end of this year-ish. But it looks as though the designers are ahead of the game. They've done a very good job. And BAE Systems engineers who are here are really to be congratulated on that. There will then be a bidding process for who takes part in the second phase. So it's not a given that there will still be a British company or more than one British company perhaps involved in building a prototype. But we obviously, as the government, support the involvement of British companies in this project and hope very much that they'll be chosen for the second phase. So that's going quite well. On wider defence collaborations, we're always in the, we're very interested in supporting wider industrial collaborations in our defence sectors. I mean, these are largely commercial decisions to be taken by the companies themselves in the UK and with partners in Turkey. But there are a number of things going on at any one time. So it's not limited just to the design of the new fighter aircraft.
I see. Chris Bowers asks, what advice would you give to the EU ahead of the council meeting later this month? Would you advise them to hold back from sanctions on Turkey, something that's been discussed?
Well, of course, if you just left the club, the last thing they'd like to hear from you is any advice, because that is presumptuous. So I do not presume to give any advice to the European Union on the conduct of its foreign policy. However, for the sake of argument, it's the British government's view that pragmatic engagement with the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean are much more likely to bring about a calmer atmosphere and with a bit of luck one day, maybe the resolution of the issues between the different parties. So I think wielding a stick is almost certainly less effective.
Okay, and I'm just wondering there what other questions. There are so many questions on Cyprus. Would you like to expand on, Buse Uchenla asks about, this is another different topic. Yeah, Buse Uchenla asks about are there any further ideas being considered for British-Turkish integration schemes in the UK post-Brexit? And I think she's specifically asking in relation to students and universities.
Right, so we have, for students, we have a government scholarship program called the Chevening program, which provides for 1 year scholarships, very generous scholarships for people who want to study for a master's degree for 1 year in the UK. And there's quite a well-established criteria for people who want to apply for that scheme, including you have to have worked for a couple of years as well before we take you, because we're looking to give the scholarships to people who are going to be leaders in their fields. So we like a bit of evidence that someone has got those leadership qualities as well as the academic qualities. In addition to that, there is the Turing program, which I've mentioned in my remarks earlier, which is designed to help pay for British students to go and study in universities all around the world, not confined just to the Erasmus countries. And our hope is that universities in the receiving countries will also want to reciprocate and send students to the UK. But this is in very, very early days of its development. But yes, so the replacement of Erasmus Plus is going to be Turing, and let's hope we can make it work on a global scale as we.
There's still more questions. Giray Sadek asks, to what extent do you think the UK and Turkey can lead alternative groupings of non-EU NATO allies essential for European security, such as adding Norway, etc.?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand what is behind that question. I mean, I think within NATO, we try and work as NATO together. And we have very good relations with Norway. And after all, Norway, a bit like Turkey, was a NATO ally with a common border with the Soviet Union in the days of the Cold War. And we do a lot of training in Norway because you can get really good cold weather Arctic training in Norway. So I think we won't be inhibited, and Turkey shouldn't feel inhibited too about doing things with NATO allies, whether they're NATO allies who are also European Union member states, or whether they're NATO allies who are not. I think that's just normal business, and we should look for cooperation and joint exercising according to the merits of what we hope to achieve with it.
I have a question here from Bashak Alton on a very different subject. And the breadth of these questions makes me realize, Dominic, how broad a remit your post has and how many different fields you have to maintain an interest in. So Bashak Alton writes, hello, I'm a visual and mixed media artist, mosaic photography and videography, working in Ankara. I would like to ask your approach to develop and support artistic projects in Turkey and Britain with new cooperation between British and Turkish artists. And she gives her thanks for the webinar.
Well, that's very nice of her. I think the short answer is that if you're looking for funding, if this is a question about funding, then in the embassy we don't have funding for supporting the visual arts in Turkey, unfortunately, or collaborations. But if she would like to find out whether there is funding available from possible UK partners, then the first instance she should talk to our colleagues in the British Council who will know more about this. I mean, it's a difficult area because, the UK lost nearly 10% of its GDP last year. So we are going through a spending review at the moment back in London where all Whitehall departments are having their budgets cut, or pretty much all. And we will then have to, deal with the consequences. And we don't know exactly what the consequences will mean yet for our activities in Turkey, but one thing it will mean is there won't be sort of money for new things, I don't expect, for the time being. So I think this is probably more an issue for matchmaking rather than for funding, as far as the government goes for the time being.
Okay. An anonymous attendee writes on the Middle East and Turkey's relations. Turkey seems to have run into some difficulties with the Gulf Cooperation Council, which now seems to be resolving itself. What do you think Turkey could do to repair its relations with the GCC? And maybe we could add whether Britain has a role with mending Turkish relations with the GCC.
Well, I don't think we have a direct role for mending the relationship between Turkey and the GCC, other than, we all benefit if those relationships work well and smoothly and we're avoiding extra tensions. So we have a general interest in, solving problems and bringing countries together. And I think one of the aspects of our diplomacy outside the European Union is we may be prompted to do more of that. But it's, ultimately, a third party is not going to make the difference. It'll be Turkey and the countries concerned finding a way to improve the quality of their dialogue, which is often one of the first things you have to do, and to make the efforts to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to see ourselves as others see us, as Robbie Burns said, and then see what the scope is for resolving the underlying issues. But it's very good news. I mean, the main point, as the questioner said, it's very good news that some of the tensions between Qatar and the other GCC countries are diminishing significantly, and likewise between Turkey and some of the other GCC countries. So we very much welcome this development and hope it'll go further.
Okay. I'll squeeze another question in. This is from Elis Javori, who is a UK journalist based in Istanbul. His question is, you mentioned that the UK and Turkey find themselves in friendly competition with the EU. Which areas in particular could Turkey and the UK work together to engage in friendly competition with the EU?
Well, I suppose if you think of trade, that might be an area. So, you know, we have opportunities, British companies and Turkish companies, we have opportunities to do things together within the scope of our bilateral FTA. And insofar as we are sourcing each other's products, that's a sort of competition with European companies. There may be a more direct way in which we'd be in competition is if British and Turkish companies, and I didn't mention this actually, although this is an area that we are looking at, if British and Turkish companies want to form consortia and bid for projects in third countries where we bring different skills to the consortiums, and you know, where there may be in parts of the Middle East or parts of Africa, real opportunities for us if we work together. And I guess to some degree that would be in competition with European, indeed American, and maybe other companies as well. I think I used the term friendly competition, not because I was thinking of anything particularly adversarial, but just because I think it is different when you're outside the European Union from being inside the European Union. And as I said in my talk, I'm not quite sure how that translates at the moment into kind of practical common ground. But you have to feel somehow, even if it's only that it builds a bit of rapport between us, because we're both in the same kind of geopolitical boat. I think time will tell how significant that is.
I'll squeeze in one last question, I think. Normally we finish around past. I'm not sure if that's the exact scheduling for today. But Alan Mellart writes, Dear Ambassador, where do you think there could be business opportunities between the two countries?
Your voice went, Dan, when you were reading the question. Could you say it again, please?
Yeah, Alan Mellart writes, in which areas do you think there could be more business opportunities between the two countries?
Yeah, so I think there could be more joint ventures, or maybe more British investment in high-tech manufacturing in Turkey, because I think here you've got a disciplined, hard-working, skilled workforce, relatively low overheads, and seamless access into the European Union single market. So I think there could be opportunities there. I think when I was talking about the green zero emissions decarbonisation of our economies that we have targeted, and the UK has set a target of 2050 to be zero carbon, you know, that's going to require a lot of investment. And some of the investment, you know, British firms inside the UK will be producing, some of it will be buying. But, you know, Turkey has this very broad-based manufacturing sector. And I think we can do more here in Turkey, and British companies may want to come here. I mean, it does assume, of course, and I think I've said this earlier, it does assume that there won't be additional, you know, carbon adjustment tariffs put in place, which would take away the appeal. But I think there's something there. And I think also there is scope in fresh agriculture and in services as well for us both to do more. So I think there's quite broad scope.
Okay, I'm going to pass them back to Lutz now for some concluding remarks. And thanks, Dominic, and thanks to everyone who asked a question. And thanks.
Have never happened before, should not have happened today, but there we are. Sorry for that. Thank you very much. Like I said, thought-provoking lecture, and I think that the questions also showed that. So thank you very much in name of the BIAA, and I'm sure also of everybody who attended the lecture. And to those of the attendees that are interested in more on policy, on the 15th of April, for example, there is a panel organized by the BIAA that will talk about the Turkish, UK, and USA relationship in the Biden presidency. So what can we expect? That will be on the 15th of April. You can go to the website and sign up via there. So thank you once again, Mr. Ambassador, and everybody who attended. And I would like to wish you a nice evening, a nice afternoon, a nice day, depending on where you are, and hope to see you again in one of the upcoming BIAA events. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Lutz. Thank you, Dan. Bye-bye.